Good morning and good evening. My name is Justin Zhou, the President of the National Policy Foundation. On behalf of the NPF, I'd like to welcome you all to join today's event. This online forum will be focused on the topic, Taipei's opportunities and challenges under Washington-Beijing competition. And we are delighted to have a panel of esteemed expert speakers to join the discussion. And before we get started, it's my pleasure to invite our chairman, Dr. Johnny Zhang, for some opening remarks. Dr. Zhang, please.
Thank you. Good morning and good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It is my great pleasure to speak to you at the R.O.C.U.S. forum. It is a privilege for me to take part in. I would like to extend my sincere appreciation to all of our panelists, in particular our friends from the United States. It was this May when I took up my new position as NPF chairman. I was a professor of international relations for 10 years and became involved in APEC studies with a leading research institute in Taiwan. So I definitely know how the NPF can function to enhance interactions with its counterparts and friends overseas. After a slight reshuffling of the foundation's management team and staff, I hope the NPF can follow up on what has been achieved and move on to help Taiwan and the rest of the world understand contemporary regional and world affairs. Due to the unexpected coronavirus pandemic that began early this year, all of us have been unable to visit one another in person. But with crisis comes opportunity. That's why we all can meet via webinar today. Please, ladies and gentlemen, keep NPF in mind whenever you have the need to discuss domestic issues of Taiwan and mainland China's internal issues, cross-strait relationships, or regional issues involving the U.S. or other major powers. I have asked my colleagues to proactively engage policy communities around the world. We are here in Taipei, striving to provide useful perspective and exchange ideas with all friends interested in the issues mentioned above. One of the focus today is the prospect of R.O.C.U.S. relations. I believe that although the United States ended official relationship with the Republic of China in 1979, Taipei and Washington have still maintained close unofficial ties since then. Whether these ties involve politics, security, or trade and cultural exchange, maintaining them is of most importance to our foreign policy. With that, please allow me to make two more points. First, no one should deny the fact that the U.S. has long played a significant role in expanding the Republic of China's international space. I have seen an urgent need for the Republic of China to participate meaningfully in the following specialized international organizations: the WHO, the International Civil Aviation Organization, ICAO, and the International Criminal Police Organization, Interpol, among others. Taiwan needs the support of the international community, including the U.S., so let me reiterate that I think highly of the U.S. moral support that has been given to Taiwan since around the 1990s. It is the key to Taiwan's meaningful participation. I am happy to see the recent visit of the U.S. Health Secretary, Alex Azar, as a sign of increased support from Washington, particularly for Taiwan's participation in the WHO. After 6 long years, the U.S. has finally once again dispatched a cabinet-level official to the Republic of China. All of this rests on the 1979 Taiwan Relations Act, TRA, which forms the foundation for our bilateral relations. I hope the U.S. government can implement its recently passed Taiwan-friendly bills, continuing to allow high-level officials on both sides to meet their counterparts on an institutionalized and regularized basis. This is crucial. The lack of diplomatic ties does not necessarily mean lack of high-level official exchange between two countries. Second, U.S. arms sales to the Republic of China have continued to grow, including successive approvals of the sales of major weaponry and equipment. The process of these important sales is becoming gradually more normalized. These are all positive developments. However, besides hardware sales, the two countries should also engage in deeper and broader dialogue, exchanges, training, and cooperation regarding security affairs. The Republic of China relies on strong national defense for not only prosperity, but also for its very survival. Therefore, a reasonable increase in Taiwan's defense budget appears necessary. That being said, the legislative yuan of the R.O.C. must exercise checks and balances to ensure that every taxpayer's money is spent with care. Ladies and gentlemen, I do value today's occasion as a good opportunity for reinforcing our mutual understanding about key issues we all feel concerned about. After the COVID-19 pandemic eventually subsides, I hope to visit the United States, which will be my first U.S. trip since my assuming leadership of the KLT Kuomintang this March and of the NPF this May. I strongly believe that by representing a rational and pragmatic voice from Taiwan, my colleagues and I will be able to better serve to deepen communication and understanding between Taiwan's and U.S. societies. This is the task all of us should devote ourselves to easily. In closing, on behalf of the NPF, I want to wish all of you a very productive forum today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Zhang. Great. Now I would like to introduce the speakers of today's forum. In order of the speakers list, we have former AIT Director, Dr. Douglas Tao. Hi, Doc. And we have Mr. Ryan Hess, the Michael H. Amakos Chair in the Foreign Policy Program at Brookings. Hi, Ryan. Great. In this conference room, we have Professor Kui Bo Huang at the College of International Affairs of the National Zhengzhi University.
Hi, Doc and Ryan. Long time no see.
And we have Professor Zheng Dongzuo at the Department of Political Science of the National Taiwan University.
Say hello.
Hi, Dr. Zhou, just right.
Hi.
And finally, we have the Dr. Yu Fangling,
Hello.
convener of the National Security Division of the NPF. It's an old friend. Okay, today we are going to focus on three crucial issues. Advances in R.O.C.U.S. relations, R.O.C.'s international space, and cross-strait stability. Now, let us officially begin the forum with each speaker sharing their professional opinion on the topic in 5 to 7 minutes. And after all experts have spoken, a roughly 15 to 20 minutes time period for questions and comments will follow. Okay, without further ado, would you please, Dr. Paul, you go first.
It's wonderful to be with all of you in this format and to see so many old friends. Welcome Dr. John in his new capacity as the head of the foundation. I've been already reading press reports of studying your father's comments on arms sales and purchases, and I was aware of his new position. It's good to see you in this new job. And Dr. Hui has been an old friend. We miss him in Washington and in the U.S. So all of you are welcome back to the U.S. when we can start to make it happen again. And thank you for the opportunity to make a few remarks in this gathering. I was asked, as shown, to talk about U.S.-Taiwan relations, Taiwan's international space, and cross-strait relations. In my personal experience, as you know, for many years, all three of these have been relationships and interchanges that depended heavily on the atmosphere in which they developed. And when we had the most success, it was when the atmosphere between the United States and China was at least constructive and sometimes even progressing forward in new ways. I think back to the membership of Taiwan in the Asian Development Bank, the introduction of Taiwan to the APEC format, and I guess most recently, it was quite a while ago, in the double entry of Taiwan and the PRC into the World Trade Organization. Since then, we've had very mixed results. During the Ma presidency, we saw some improvements through the participation as an invitee to the World Health Assembly, but that came as it went as it came, with a political change in Taipei. And today, we have to be frank, as the topic of this conference, I think, indicates, which is that we've reached a new point in relations between the U.S. and China, and discussion of how to follow the old path towards greater international organization representation, stronger cross-strait relations. It's a new era. Plainly, that context does not exist today, nor does it look likely it will return at anything we might call soon, whether it's Trump who remains in office or Biden who comes in. We have entered a new era. And so we have to look closely at the way we've conceptualized and tried to find diplomatic strategies for dealing with the triangle between Taipei, Beijing, and Washington. New era requires new thinking, and because these are very fundamental policy, strategic elements that we're discussing, we have to proceed very carefully. In my thinking, we need to recognize that China has always had a mix of coercion and persuasion in its policy toward Taiwan, and as it reflected itself in dealings with Washington. Clearly, over the last 5 years, that has now tilted towards more coercion and less persuasion. And I think if you're picking a moment in time when we say things have really changed, for me, it was the ruthless way the national security law was imposed on Hong Kong, that signaled to Taiwan the one country, two systems idea, well, never really welcome on the island. That's changed in the way this message is being sent from China. And we have to start looking at things in terms of trying to, for the time ahead, the immediate time ahead, try to cause Beijing to recalibrate the way it sees coercion as more beneficial than persuasion. Which means we have to counter coercion, and that's in all these formats that we've been begun to discuss. We have to, of course, each proceed from our own national interest. The United States' national interest is very much in debate today. I think there's a lot of assumption about we don't like China. We've arrived at an attitude, but we've not yet devised a strategy. And we have to develop that strategy. Normally, we would develop that strategy in close consultation with our friends and allies before we deploy the strategy, or as we deploy it. I would say that's not possible in the next few months, maybe even longer. That we just don't deploy our diplomacy the way we used to, and that's makes it harder for all of us. For Taiwan, my advice would be, and I think you know, you have to calculate your interests first, and I can't do that for you. But I do believe that Taiwan will be smart enough, as it has over the last years, to really, since Chen Shui-bian's time in office, to really emphasize effective consultation and maintain clear and frequent communication with successive American administrations since that time. That, I think, is becoming even more valued and necessary as we go into this new phase. As I say, I thought China crossed the Rubicon with the Hong Kong national security law. You take that in combination with what they were doing on the Indian frontier, what they were doing in South China Sea, East China Sea, and their aggressive diplomacy, whether it's related to COVID or other things, there's a assertiveness coming out of China that cannot go without a response. So what do we do? The question of international space, thinking about international space took me back in time. You all remember Zhang Jieren, C.J. Chen, who has many years service in the United States. And I first got to know him in the mid-1980s, and we used to talk about international space for Taiwan back in that period. We had some success out of it. I remember saying to him at the time, Taiwan has such a strong foundation in international medicine, science, that making Taiwan indispensable to the world in those areas, in biology and medicine and hospitalization treatments and the like, is a way to make Taiwan part of the international scene that cannot be dismissed, that has to be taken seriously. Well, all these years later, it's never been more true than this moment, where Taiwan has accumulated experiences. I was part of that in the SARS episode in 2002-03, where lessons were learned and applied and methods were improved. And Taiwan is the model today for COVID treatment. And thank you for the masks and the many other things that were sent our way by the Thai government and many private individuals in Taiwan to the United States. So on international space, I don't see a reasonable prospect of expanding the formal kinds of activities. The WHA is probably going to be too hard to get into. I don't think ICAO or Interpol are going to be available, even though Taiwan is fully qualified to make an important contribution and to receive the benefits of participation in those organizations. We're going to have to exploit the COVID experience to the maximum extent possible. Make that your foot in the door in relations all over the world, international organizations and others. It's a strong hand to play. It's not going to get stronger with time, I don't think. Maybe if you come up with a vaccine before anybody else, you'll have an even stronger hand. But that's what my advice would be to play right now, and maintain your realistic expectations about expending effort for these other more formal sounding organizations. Secondly, on U.S.-Taiwan relations, I really think that we need some new elements of this. And this is a tricky proposition. Alan Walkman and others in their day wrote some good stuff about how there's a very potent combination of national prestige and national security tied up in high politics and the low politics of China when it comes to Taiwan. And so what frameworks exist, if they provide stability, we should be careful not to undermine them. These days, China's use of close-in air patrols, naval activities, talk of, if not proximity by military exercises aimed at somehow coercing Taiwan. It's calling for a new level of effort from the U.S. Now, I welcomed previous administrations and the Trump administration's efforts to improve Taiwan's self-defense capabilities. The addition of F-16s this past year, I'll put aside the question of whether a few more tanks are going to make a big difference to help Taiwan. But other so-called asymmetrical systems are being brought in, and I think that's largely sensible. In her inauguration address, President Tsai talked about enhancing the defense budget, and I think she's serious about it. There are important things to be done, but we have to be even more serious. The U.S., I think, needs to step up its effort. Now, I don't think it means 4-star officers landing to band music at air bases in Taiwan. It means sergeants and lower-ranking officers who are proficient in weapons systems turning up quietly, or Taiwan counterparts turning up quietly in the U.S., significantly enhancing our defense cooperation. The PRC will know what happens, but we don't have to put it in their face through the formal rejection of the outlines built in the 3 communiques of relations between the U.S. and China with regard to Taiwan. We have to do that later if China persists. And I think we don't want to throw away that structure until it really is no longer contributing to the stability of the cross-strait situation. So the U.S. and Taiwan have to enhance their dialogue, deepen it, not necessarily, as I say, symbolize it, but be substantive other than symbolic. And there's a great deal more that can be done. It's going to require cooperation from the legislative yuan, from the opposition parties, including, most importantly, the Kuomintang. So this is a tough challenge ahead. For the near term, I hope that we'll see the U.S. behave reasonably responsibly. Quite surprisingly, despite his extreme rhetoric of recent months, Secretary Pompeo, when he was asked by a very unlikely interviewer named Sean Spicer about his policy on Taiwan and the mainland, he gave the most reassuring remarks I've heard in the entire Trump administration about sticking to the formulas that have been established in the past to guide our relationship. I think that was, whether it was an accident or not, it was a good thing to have happened, and I hope it'll happen again in various forms. Well, we use that to cover a much more robust development of our defense relationship. The third area I'm asked to comment on is cross-strait relations. And here I think the most important idea that comes to mind for me is to strengthen Taiwan's economic resiliency. You're going to be seeing your ability to exploit the mainland market is diminishing. TSMC and other related companies are going through a very tough time. You absolutely need to have Taiwan expand its international economic presence. And this is, I would hope early on, an FTA can be done, a free trade agreement with the U.S. Taiwan has got capable negotiators who ought to be out talking to the members of the CPTPP to see if there's still some place to get Taiwan properly part of that. As the world of RCEP and TPP grows, I'm sure you're aware Taiwan is not part of it. It's only riding on the back of this. It has to be part of it. And Taiwan has to re-examine its own economic fundamentals. When Ms. Tsai was first elected, before she took office, she asked her spokesman, Joseph Wu Xiaoxie, speak at CSIS. And he was asked about an FTA at that time. And he gave an incredibly detailed and solid answer, recognizing the many things that need to be done to reform agricultural and other practices in Taiwan, to conform with what's required to be part of an FTA with the U.S. It is not too late to start addressing those. It's only been 5 years or 4 years since he last, 4.5 years since he last talked about that. Taiwan has adopted the position of wanting an FTA. USTR said it doesn't have enough time on its hands, bandwidth to handle this. Well, that argument from USTR is no longer credible. They're dealing with a lot of negotiations now, and there's time to talk to Taiwan. And if Taiwan, with cooperation of the legislative yuan, where Kuomintang has had a checkered record on this question of agricultural reform in Taiwan, I think people need to lift their eyes up from Taiwan to the greater international scene and recognize that without a robust international economic presence, Taiwan's ability to stand up to PRC pressures will be negligible as time passes. And so I would put that as my major effort in cross-strait relations, and that is to not dwell on cross-strait relations, but to create a resilient set of relationships that protect you from the vicissitudes of cross-strait relations. So I'll stop there and look forward to our discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Doug, for your insights. Well, we'll move to Mr. Hess. Hey, Ryan, whenever you are ready, please.
Well, thank you very much. It's really an honor to be with this group. Thank you to NPF for including me in this discussion. I much appreciated Dr. Jiang's reaffirmation of his strong support for close U.S.-Taiwan relations, and also benefited from Doug's wisdom just now. My primary motivation is to listen to you and hear what you're thinking in Taipei, but I understand that the price of admission is to share a few thoughts of my own at the start. So I will try to be efficient in offering a perspective on the cross-strait situation, and then on where I hope the U.S.-Taiwan relationship develops in the coming years. I think it is widely acknowledged in Washington, in Taipei, and in Beijing that the cross-strait relationship is growing more tense and more tenuous, but there does appear to be disagreement on the cause of that dynamic. From Beijing's perspective, I've heard repeatedly, and I think Doug has as well, that they view themselves as acting defensively, reactively, responding to actions and efforts by the United States, as well as a steady drift from Taiwan away from the mainland, and that they are motivated by an effort or desire to arrest those trends. From Washington's perspective, I think that it is broadly accepted that Beijing's intensifying pressure on Taiwan is the primary source of rising cross-strait tensions. And seen in the uptick in military activities that Doug cataloged, it's informed by Beijing's efforts to stifle Taiwan's international space, most notably by blocking Taiwan's participation in the WHO in the midst of a global pandemic. But it's also informed by Beijing's heavy-handed actions in Hong Kong. I will leave it to you all to characterize how the relationship from Taipei looks. I will not pretend to speak on your behalf. Now, some pro-Taiwan analysts and lawmakers in the United States have welcomed worsening U.S.-China relations, believing that it provides more space for the United States and Taiwan to grow closer together. These analysts believe that Washington acts with greater restraint on Taiwan when it is doing a cooperative agenda with Beijing, and with less restraint when it doesn't feel like it has much to lose in its relationship with China. And so according to this logic, Washington is now freer to pursue opportunities to develop closer ties to Taipei because the relationship with the U.S. and China is so bad. Frankly, I find myself as yet unpersuaded by this line of argument, and here's why. First, I think that deteriorating U.S.-China relations often occur alongside worsening cross-strait relations. And this is a point that Doug made at the outset of his comments. Rising cross-strait tensions typically invite greater pressure from the mainland on Taiwan and make improvements in U.S.-Taiwan relationships more costly for Taiwan. I don't think that's good for you, I don't think that's good for us. Second, deteriorating cross-strait relations are not good for Taiwan's economy. For one thing, the recent effort to decouple the U.S. and Chinese economies has created challenges for Taiwan companies that either operate in or have exposure to the Chinese market. TSMC is the most obvious example of this. It has had to navigate a very difficult set of commercial decisions as a consequence of worsening U.S.-China relations, but it's far from the only company that is having to do so. Third, the United States and Taiwan don't need worsening U.S.-China relations in order to justify advancing their own relationship. My view is that the period from 2009 to 2016 demonstrated that it's possible to construct an argument that there's more diplomatic space for the United States and Taiwan to move forward together when cross-strait ties are more stable. And you can just look at the record of that period. There were $14 billion of arms sales. It cabinet official was sent for the first time in 14 years to Taiwan. Taiwan was included in the visa waiver program. Taiwan received observer status at the World Health Assembly. The United States and Taiwan work together to protect and preserve Taiwan's diplomatic allies. The Global Cooperation and Training Framework was launched. There was work together in the Anti-ISIL Coalition. There was work on the Cancer Moonshot, and on and on. I will spare you the laundry list just to try to make the point that progress has been made advancing U.S.-Taiwan relations, both when U.S.-China relations have been stable and also when they've been strained. A bad U.S.-China relationship is not a prerequisite for progress in U.S.-Taiwan relations, in the same way that bad cross-strait relations are not needed for better U.S.-Taiwan ties. By the same token, I would also argue that a bad cross-strait relationship does not necessarily benefit U.S.-Taiwan relations. One thing I take away is not to think about U.S.-Taiwan relations as being subordinate to or derivative of U.S.-China relationship, but rather to be seen in their own light. And when we evaluate the U.S.-Taiwan relationship in its own light, I think it's possible to find a fair degree of overlap in interest in Washington and Taipei. Frankly speaking, from an American's perspective, we have viewed it as in our interest to see Taiwan emerge as a vibrant democracy that has confidence in its security, that enjoys dignity and respect on the world stage, and that has control of its economic destiny. These are a set of objectives that I think are broadly shared on a bipartisan basis in Taiwan, but if you disagree, I would be very curious to hear why. So, ultimately, my view, my final point is that a secure and prosperous Taiwan not only supports U.S.-Taiwan relations, but also allows Taiwan to approach the cross-strait relationship from a position of greater strength and confidence. That's good for us, and I believe it is good for you. So this is where I hope the focus of our efforts and energy in the U.S.-Taiwan relationship can be concentrated. Thank you again.
Thank you so much, Mr. Harris. Now let us move to next speaker, Professor Huang from our group. Mr. Huang, you may begin now.
Okay, thank you for your invitation, and my two good friends from the U.S., one from the West and other from the East, and really long time no see. And I'm so glad that I don't have to be omnidimensional whenever we meet to talk about everything, because we have Dr. Lin Yufang, Dr. Zhuo Zhendong. They're going to talk about something I don't know. Okay, so put more questions on them, not on me. And I was asked by the foundation to talk about U.S.-Taiwan relations. So I just want to mention a few points for your reference. Maybe you have heard before. First is that, I personally don't see a holistic approach of the Taiwan administration towards the U.S. I have seen sporadic arrangements or policy statements from Taiwan towards the U.S., but in terms of the holistic or a more integrated approach, I haven't seen it. That being said, I like the statement or the policy jargon put by Tsai Ing-wen in 2016. That is, she has been taking the so-called steadfast diplomacy to carry out Taiwan's foreign policy programs. However, as a former official working in the Ma administration, I have to say this steadfast diplomacy looks so similar with that of the Ma Ying-jeou's Bible diplomacy. You look at the principles and what the Taiwan administration is going to do. They are so identical. But I think there is a major difference between the two jargons, and that is, by the same doing, the Ma administration has achieved more due to better cross-strait relations. So I think cross-strait relations is really one of the key factors explaining the success or the smaller success of Taiwan's foreign policy, particularly when U.S. attitude towards Beijing has been changing dramatically. That's the first point I would like to make. And the second point I would like to make is that, in such a strategic context where the U.S. mainland China struggle has been intensive, I tend to think that there is a little room for Taiwan to maneuver. I don't know whether or not you agree or not. Because there's such a little room for Taiwan to maneuver, I tend to think, ally with the U.S. is always the most important thing for Taiwan, because the U.S. has been the most important supporter for Taiwan's security since 1940, I would say 1950, after the outbreak of the Korean War. But at the same time, I think, as Ryan Haas or Dr. Paul just mentioned, I also think that Taiwan needs to better manage its relations with mainland China, so that Taiwan-U.S. relations can be controlled in a reasonable way. Without stable cross-strait relations, can U.S.-Taiwan relations not be stable as well? At the same time, I also want to mention that Taiwan needs to develop a very special partnership with Japan. Also, with its East Asian neighbors, so that Taiwan would have a better, more balanced strategy, not towards the U.S., but also towards the region. And that is one of the survival strategies every government in Taiwan should consider. And my third point is that, I seem to sense at least two uncertainties in U.S.-Taiwan relations. Maybe there's a lag. And can you see me moving? No? Okay.
I can hear you fine.
Okay. So I'll keep speaking. I seem to sense two big uncertainties in U.S.-Taiwan relations. Let me use that as the closure of my presentation. First is, of course, U.S. attitude towards mainland China. We know there's a very, huge struggle between the two sides, U.S. and mainland China. But how long will it last? I think that is a key to a lot of, observers in Taiwan. But this is also a big uncertainty for us to understand and to predict future U.S.-Taiwan relations. And such a big uncertainty, I don't think we on the Taiwan side can answer it, but I think I will leave the question to you. So that is the first uncertainty I would like to mention. And the second major uncertainty I have observed in the past few months is whether or not the U.S. is going to get involved more in cross-strait relations. Of course, the current policy of the Trump administration has been more friendly to Taiwan, more supportive for Taiwan. But still a big question is, to what extent will the U.S. get involved in future cross-strait relations? What if after November, there will be big U-turn in U.S. mainland China relations? Then, what would Taiwan do? So, this is a second uncertainty I think you have discussed a lot in Washington. So I would like to ask you to shed some light on that. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Huang. And now we are delighted to hear from Professor Zhuo, an expert in cross-strait relations and mainland affairs.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Zhou. It's an honor to be part of this dialogue. And Dr. Paul, and nice to see you again. And Mr. Hess, thank you for, it's good to meet you. This is the first time we meet. And cross-strait relation is a big issue. There are so many things to talk. I will start my talk with a brief comment on the current strategy adopted by the Tsai administration on cross-strait relations. I think when in her inauguration speech in the last May, President Tsai raised the 4 keywords: peace, parity, democracy, and the dialogue. And you can see from her August speech, she actually explained her definition of parity. She mentioned that it refers to mutual non-denial. What a similar word that you may recall to hear during my administration. So I think that reveals his strategy as a value strategy, as I define it. The value strategy is to avoid making clear definition about the relationship between the two sides. So in my administration, the official definition of the relationship between the two sides is to deny that this is a state-to-state relationship. Well, but what is the relationship? There's no clear definition. So this is the value strategy taken by the Ma administration. Now, President Tsai take the same approach. So I think this is, to me, a big surprise that she reveals her definition of the cross-strait relationship so similar to that adopted by the Ma administration. But I think what strikes people is that why the result of the two administrations in a cross-strait relationship is so different. So I think that should direct our attention to the second part of Tsai administration's cross-strait approach. That is to take full benefit of the anti-Chinese sentiment in Taiwanese society. I think because of the unique relation between the two sides, Taiwanese society has for so long had such a strange attitude toward mainland China, and now in the last several years, it has grown to become a strong anti-Chinese sentiment. In the late Ma administration era, I think it is just a strategy taken by the DPP, as a way to overthrow the Ma administration, to take them back to power. But now I realize that it is not just a rhetorical strategy, but it is a reality in the society. It can be validated by the recent restriction on the Chinese students and the Chinese dependent of Taiwanese people. So as you may know, that in the last several months, the Chinese students who have already been registered in Taiwanese universities are not allowed, had been denied their entry back to Taiwan to attend school, and until the day before yesterday, the government decided to lift that ban. So I think this is a signal to show that the anti-Chinese sentiment is so strong that can distort the government's major policy. The last one that I want to say is that with regard to Hong Kong, the Tsai administration seems to take the approach of speaking loudly with no stick at hand. So you can see that throughout the last year, President Tsai has said so much about Hong Kong. Even this year, she said several times about her determination to show a strong will to Hong Kong that she will be with them. But what the government has done so far, especially this year, almost nothing, because the government, the weapon that the government can adopt or can utilize is so limited. It cannot match the rhetoric the government has adopted so far. So I think that, of course, we can really not do much about Hong Kong, because this is this is beyond the government, our current jurisdiction. However, to know that we have to be careful about what we say, and I think in that respect, President Tsai seems to show her weakness on the Hong Kong front. So I think my time probably is limited, and I have to stop my remark here. Thank you.
Thank you so much for these remarks. Today's last, I'd like to invite Dr. Yufang Lin, our convener of the National Security Division of the NPF, and he's also a former chairperson of the Foreign Affairs Committee in Legislative Yuan. Dr. Lin, whenever you are ready.
Okay. Mr. Paul, Mr. Hess, greetings from Taipei to both of you. And I still recall our first meeting at a time when you were director of AIT, and at a time when I was a new member of the parliament here. And you indicated recently that Taiwan was more likely to become a battlefield if the U.S. PRC tensions escalated into war. You said that the disputes in the South China Sea could be resolved peacefully unless a major event took place. I agree with your observations 100%. From the perspective of the PRC, the Taiwan Strait would be the best location in fighting against American troops because of its geographical proximity to the strait. I have two questions for you, Doc. Firstly, which one is more possible? A war between Taiwan and the Chinese mainland, or a war between the PRC and the US? Secondly, will the United States come to Taiwan's rescue once the island is attacked by the PRC? If yes, in what form? In what way? To offer Taiwan intelligence information only, or together with ammunition and weapon systems? Or to deploy American troops in the Taiwan theater and fight side by side with R.O.C. soldiers? Can you also predict the outcome of a U.S. PRC war? Sorry, my second question is really a multiple warhead missile. Your answers will be greatly appreciated. I have two questions for Mr. Hess as well. I read an editorial you wrote for Taipei Times on August 10th. You said that Beijing, Taipei, and Washington all agree that the situation in the Taiwan Strait was growing more and more dangerous. My first question is that, what would be your suggestions for reducing tensions in this part of the world? My second question has something to do with American arms sales to Taiwan. Many of our American friends, Pentagon officials in particular, have ceaselessly pushed Taiwan to promote the island nation's fighting capabilities for the purpose of deterring the PRC from taking military adventures against the Republic of China. Nevertheless, for years, Taipei has tried but failed to acquire sophisticated equipment from the US. Let me give you an example. My government has asked the US government to sell the Republic of China F-35B jet fighters rather than F-16V, because once war breaks out, the PLA will be anxious to destroy Taiwan's military and commercial airfields by launching ballistic missiles and long-range rockets through the so-called multiple launch rocket systems. There is no doubt only the short takeoff and vertical landing F-35B can continue its missiles, its missions after those airfields are seriously damaged. If Washington has really concern about the PRC's aggression towards Taiwan, how come American decision makers have kept rejecting Taipei's request for this kind of jet fighters? My argument is also applicable to other weapon systems. For instance, ships equipped with the Aegis combat system. Okay, thank you.
Dr. Paul, please. You want to answer the question now?
Let me first take on some of the questions asked by Yifang Li, and now go to some broader responses to the other presenters, Kuei-Po and Dr. Zhou. Asking the question about whether American forces will fight alongside Taiwan forces, it goes to the heart of a big problem, which is how do we create the impression of an effective deterrence? And what is an effective deterrence? An effective deterrence is no matter what the generals in Beijing or admirals may say to Xi Jinping during a period of high tensions about Taiwan's declining capacity to defend itself or American distraction and reduced capacity in the region. In the mind of a leader, he has to conclude that taking military action against Taiwan is either something he has to do or he will fall from power. And we can affect how that calculation goes. Or it would be so risky that even if he succeeds, he may fall from power because the cost will be so high. So how do you deter that? Well, you need deterrence, international cooperation to penalize China economically, diplomatically, if it resorts to using force against Taiwan or against the U.S. You also have to strengthen the components of a defense structure, military. For the U.S. to have soldiers fighting along Taiwan's armed forces, you need a lot more preparation. What we hoped for in my time at AIT was to disengage our forces so we wouldn't attack each other while dealing with an oncoming PRC threat. Moving from that to actually fighting together is something allies have a very hard time doing. The Australians, because they're smaller and always under budgeted, struggle to keep up with their American counterpart forces. In Taiwan, I think it's just very hard to imagine, which is why in my earlier presentation, I went on too long about how we need to get down to the sergeant and junior officer level of cooperation, where these people learn how to operate next to each other, how to get force multiplier effects out of cooperation at that level. Now, you ask about F-35s. Maybe Ryan will have a longer list than I have, but one, high technology tends to leak back to the mainland when it gets in the hands of Taiwan, so we don't feel comfortable putting our highest quality, latest technology. Two, it's not really a good weapons system for Taiwan. It's not good for a lot of the missions it's been assigned. It's an aircraft which has got mixed reviews in our armed forces. Three, it's extremely expensive for your budget, and if you have to spend money on bang for buck, I wouldn't put it in F-35s. And then fourth, by the time an F-35 leaves the land of Taiwan and gets up to 1,500 to 2,000 meters, it's well within the gun sights of the S-400 anti-aircraft missiles that Russia has provided to China. And so you got a lot of reasons why that's not the place to put your money. The recent acquisition of more PAC-3s, more integration, the acquisition of some anti-surface ship missiles, there's talk now of acquiring mines. It makes a lot of sense for Taiwan to be talking about mines with the U.S. These are areas where it's often referred to generically as asymmetric systems. but I think are the ones where Taiwan and the U.S. should promote their cooperation and give more pause to the admirals and generals on the PRC side who may be advising that Xi Jinping, now is the time, they can't be stopped, you will be the great reunifier of China. He was in 10 years in Fujian and Zhejiang. You know, I think he has a better idea than his admirals and generals of what a tough target Taiwan would be and how risky it would be to his own place in the leadership now and his place in Chinese history. You have to get into his head, these calculations. Now, talking about Pueblo's and Dr. Zhuo's presentations, I won't go down specifically on each item, but on the question of American policy, Trump himself is a real problem when it comes to Taiwan. There were plenty of people, you know, Randy Schreiber and others you know well, who served in his administration, who did all they could for Taiwan and would have done more. I think there are other people as well involved in the NSC and elsewhere who have a very, some of them love Taiwan, some of them love Taiwan to death, to quote an American scholar on the subject. They would love to see you get involved in the fight against the mainland. That may not be your identical interest. But in the case of Trump, he seems to have no care at all for Taiwan. As John Bolton's book revealed, he said it was like the nib of his pen compared to the desk in his office, compared to the mainland. And that behavior has revealed itself pretty conclusively through the 4 years he's been in office. So of course you're going to get mixed signals from the Trump administration, because at the top of the brain operates completely different from the body of the administration. Secondly, the long-term strategy. I'm a big believer in pendulum theory, which is that China chose Xi Jinping because they thought Hu Jintao was too weak. And Hu Jintao was weak. Jiang Zemin made sure of that. And so they brought in Xi Jinping, but Xi Jinping wasn't in office a year when I started hearing from mainland friends that maybe we picked the wrong guy, he's too strong. I think when his time in office comes to an end, and that may be 5 years from now or 10, who knows, when his time in office comes to an end for whatever reason, they're not going to be looking for another strong guy. They're going to be looking for someone who reduces the cost of the PRC relationship. Taiwan should be playing the long game. You should have a strategy for when that day, or when the tide shifts in a different direction. Don't cut your ties. Don't close the passes. Keep doors open. My walk for dealing with China has long been, when you don't hear often in English, but you probably know it, co-optation. Get into the same bed with China on as many projects as you can, and when you know where they are, and you can see what they're doing, and you can influence their choices. And we should have been doing that on trade. We should be, my example I'll cite is the strong measures against Huawei. I believe we should have done much more to get into Huawei the way we've gotten into ZTE, through adjustments of their board management, their mission, through courtroom settlements over their misdeeds in the past, to get a grip on them. TSMC's leadership has long understood that you keep China on life support. You don't hand them the family jewels, you give them the jewels nobody in the family wants anymore, but still look valuable in China. And that way you keep them dependent on the outside support. And it's also a source of income and prosperity for yourself. I would not recommend Taiwan willy-nilly cutting all of its investments or its trade with the mainland. You know, take advantage of that co-optation while you develop resilience elsewhere in the world and less direct dependency. It's a more complex approach, but it's co-optation and pendulum theory combined in my crazy way of thinking.
Thank you, Dr. Paul. How about your opinion, Mr. Hess?
Well, I will just offer two very brief comments because I want to make sure that we preserve time for you all to react to what Doug just put on the table. The first comment I will make is in reaction to Juan Pueblo's question about the durability or endurance of the U.S. attitude toward China. And my view always has been that the endurance of any approach to China depends upon two primary factors. One is public support in the United States, and the second is support amongst American allies and partners and friends around the world. And I think if you look at both of those measures, even though there is a high unfavorability of China in the United States right now, there is no evidence of support or enthusiasm amongst the American public for a hostile or adversarial policy towards China. We have plenty of problems to deal with right now. Most Americans are not looking for a fight with China to add on top of that list. So I would just caution extrapolating too much from this current moment into onward trajectories. I think a lot will depend upon the outcome of our election in November, of course, but I think that there is a question mark, at least in my mind, about how enduring this current very aggressive attitude toward China is. Second, on the question of what should we do if our interest or our goal is to try to mellow tensions in the Taiwan Strait a bit. I will only speak from an American perspective. I would love to hear your thoughts, but I think that we need to get back in the business of communicating directly and clearly with Beijing what our intentions are, what our policies are, what our concerns are, what our priorities are. The record of the last few years just demonstrates that relying upon military signaling to register displeasure is a pretty crude, pretty ineffective, pretty expensive, and pretty dangerous way of communicating with each other. And that's where we are right now. I don't think it's healthy, and I don't think it's useful to anyone. So I would like to see a return to a more normal, functional approach of dealing directly, candidly, forthrightly with the Chinese on what it is that we're thinking about, why we're doing what we're doing. But I also think that an element of deterrence is reassurance. And Doug mentioned earlier that Secretary Pompeo, made a comment that was slightly reassuring. For a Trump administration, by their lowest standards, that's pretty good. But it's not. It's not. What is needed. I think what is needed at this point, if we view it as an effort to stabilize the situation in the Taiwan Strait, is a reaffirmation of the four corners of America's commitments on these issues. That the United States doesn't support Taiwan independence, will not establish official relations, that we understand that there are some limits on arms sales, and that we don't have plans to pursue a defensive treaty or formal alliance on security issues. Those are the four corners of the outer boundaries that have served as the foundation for the China relationship for some time. And I think they've been supportive in the large of cross-strait stability for most of the past 4 years.
Okay, great. Thank you, Dr. Pao and Mr. Hatch. Due to time constraints, unfortunately, we have to wrap up this forum now. Thank you again for your time and participation. I believe that the end of this forum will be a big start for our new future collaborations. Thanks again, and I look forward to hearing from you all soon. Thank you and goodbye.
See you in Taipei.
See you.
Ryan, come to play golf in Taipei.
Bye, Ryan.
Bye now.
Okay.
I would love to.
Bye bye.